We're joined now by Mr. Felix Morka, who is the Executive Director of Social and Economic Rights Action Center. He was also with the Lagos Metropolitan Development and Governance Projects. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you.
Well, speaking about infrastructural development, the challenge that we have here, what's your perspective from what you've seen? Because authorities will always say funds are allocated for these projects to be done. When they are not done, we expect that to be pointed out and we in turn take action. But looking at the cycle, what do you see wrong with it?
Well, let me just say that infrastructure in the country is in a solid state from across the sectors, from roads to the air transportation to the healthcare sector to the educational sector. It's in a solid state. And Nigeria operates a traditional system where the government really plays a key role, a central role in the provision of infrastructure. In other countries, some have moved on to points where the government has become more of a coordinating mechanism rather than the actual implementer. But the provision of infrastructure in the country is so deeply embedded in the whole fabric of the patronage system in the country. The poor governance, I think, feeds a lot of the terrible results, both the output and the outcomes that we've seen when it comes to infrastructure.
Does that suggest,
yes.
pardon me to butt in, does that
Sure.
suggest that the private sector is not so ready to take up that challenge and hence government won't just hand it down to them?
No, I don't think it's about the unreadiness of the private sector. I think it's more about the commitment of the government to maintain the provision of services that it's so grossly incapable of providing, because they feed on that. That is what drives government. That is the reason so many even contemplate service in government, because the government is very hands-on. There's huge resources at its disposal that they use without a lot of accountability to the people or to the government itself. So the problem is that the government's unwillingness to, I think, cede certain areas of operation, especially in the management of public infrastructure. Because it's one thing to build a road, it's quite another to maintain it. And often, even when the roads are built and built to an average quality, there is not a corresponding investment in the maintenance of that road. And road maintenance is not something that governments typically are efficient in doing. They generally don't do that because governments, their operations are very streamlined. They tend to be very bureaucratic and sort of routine. But road maintenance is a little more engaging. It's more active. Maintenance of anything, quite frankly, requires a lot of vigilance, a lot of I think care in both your diagnosis and in mobilizing action to solving those problems. Not to talk of being efficient in the use of resources, because the Nigerian government doesn't have a track record in that type of optimization of resources through efficiency.
They've always tried to see that it works that way. Taking a cue from your suggestion, the public sector partnership and all of that. From our last guest, who is also an engineer, he says, well, the only PPP that has ever worked in the country is just the Lekki-Ekpe Expressway. So far, that's the much he knows. So why is it that it hasn't been successful in that regard? Now we're talking specifically on roads maintenance.
Yes. Well, the reason is that, from my knowledge, I find that the planning process for the concession of road construction is flawed, generally, both at state and federal levels. It's flawed. As you mentioned, I was formerly on the board of the LMDGP, the World Bank $200 million World Bank project that was meant to provide infrastructure services to a lot of the slums in Lagos State. You find that at the conceptual stages, a lot of mistakes are made. Many of the things that make roads sustainable are not actually factored in at the planning stages, because often the officials who are involved are too much in a hurry to make their word, to go through the process and say, okay, you have the contract, you go and build the road, without really taking care to figure out exactly even the terrain on which that road is to be built. Because you may build a 20-kilometer road, on one terrain, and then another 20 kilometers And both will require, different cost implications for maintenance because of climatic factors, a lot of environmental factors, the volume of usage, and so on. So there's no such thing as taking the model for one road and applying to the other. The problem is that the government again is very heavy-handed. The other is that they are not transparent in and don't disclose a lot of the information they actually gather. When contractors bid, a lot of the information that is supposed to be provided are not provided to begin with, and those that are provided are hoarded by the government.
What kind of information are you talking about?
I'm talking about, for instance, I have seen contracts that were awarded to, foreign companies that, at the end of the day, were found to have no more than 50,000 pounds sterling in their so-called foreign accounts. And these contracts are awarded to them because they're foreign contractors, and they are reputed to have the capacity, both the engineering capacity as well as the financial resources to deliver on the projects.
Government doesn't do its investigations.
The due diligence is absolutely not done. So a lot of it, because if just a mild investigation, just requesting for some type of financial disclosures by this company, will reveal that they don't have the sort of financial base to undertake a project of that magnitude.
But,
so, yes.
Okay,
right.
But the situation where these projects are eventually given out to these companies and they run through with them, why is it difficult for government to integrate those projects into the national plan?
Well, your question is...
Like the PPP projects, for instance, given to foreign companies, they finish the projects, even though due process is not done, but eventually when the projects are done, they are not infused into the national plan.
Well, your question assumes that there is a national plan.
Okay.
I'm not sure what you're referring to as national plan, because I'm not quite aware that many of our governments go through any sort of strategic planning process to create what might be called a national plan.
What have you found out? Because in your findings, working with those people who were actually taken out of the slums, trying to develop the slums, some of them were actually homeless. It's part of the developments we're talking about now.
Yes.
So did you, in your interaction with the government, at any point in time, discover a national plan?
No. What I've found is that there is a lot of there's a culture of tentativeness about government. A culture of tentativeness, very ad hoc sort of approach. An official comes in, a minister is appointed or a commissioner is appointed. He wants to create a system. He wants to make a system his own. He wants to own the system, to imprint his own ideas and his own, thinking on that system. So at the end of the day, you find that whatever it was that was operational is jettisoned for a new system that is not put through any tests of, cogency or even sensibility. Okay, and that becomes the norm, the modus operandi for that department, and they go on with it. Unfortunately, in some of our bigger states, including Lagos State, you do not have any sort of planning going on. A lot of the contracts and the jobs are just like knee-jerk reactions. Somebody passes through a road and there's there's some type of pressure. Oh yes, trust me.
Some of them will argue that no way. They actually have meetings, they have executive council meetings, they bring up some of these ideas, and that's why they say most of those roads are maintained. Emphasis on maintenance of some of these roads.
No, I don't quite, I don't think that's what's going on. You see, yes, you're right. I'm not talking about, executive management meetings or people coming to brief the governor or writing memos or even preparing reports and so on. That's not those are things, those are daily events and activities that occur in any department of government. In China's television, that occurs every day. But it's quite different from sitting down, from a management team sitting down with its consultants and developing a plan that is holistic, that has both its objectives defined, its vision, its mission, and the methods and resources required to actually accomplish